The colony ship, Wandering Hope, had been traveling through deep space for 3 standard cycles when the incident happened. Commander Vethra of the Karathi species stood in the hallway outside the human quarters, her 4 eyes blinking rapidly in confusion. She was covered in thick gray fur, stood nearly 7 feet tall, and her clawed hands were currently pressed against her face in a gesture of complete disbelief. Behind her, 3 small Karathi cubs were pressing themselves against the closed door of the human's room. They were barely past their first molting, each one about the size of a large earth dog, with oversized paws and ears that seemed too big for their heads. Their names were Rith, Mava, and the smallest one, Kelp. They were scratching at the metal door with soft, whimpering sounds, completely ignoring their mother's commands to return to the family den. "I do not understand," Commander Vethra said to her second officer, Lieutenant Brox. "The cubs have a perfectly good sleeping chamber. It is temperature-controlled. It has their favorite bedding materials. Why do they insist on disturbing the human?" Lieutenant Brox, a male Karathi with darker fur, shook his head slowly. "They have been doing this every night cycle for the past week, Commander. Ever since the human female showed them that strange activity she called storytelling." The door suddenly slid open, and Dr. Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway. She was small by human standards, with black hair tied back in a messy bun and tired eyes that somehow still managed to look amused. She was wearing what she called pajamas, which were soft clothes decorated with small images of earth animals called cats. "Hey there, little ones," Sarah said, her voice gentle. The 3 cubs immediately rushed past her legs and into her quarters, their tails wagging frantically. Sarah looked up at Commander Vethra with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, Commander. I think this is my fault." Commander Vethra's ears flattened against her skull in the Karathi expression of resignation. "Dr. Chen, you are the xenobiologist assigned to study the Karathi culture and biology. You are not supposed to become a substitute mother to my offspring." "I didn't mean for this to happen," Sarah said, stepping aside so the commander could see into her room. The 3 cubs had already climbed onto Sarah's bed and were arranging themselves in a pile. Kelp, the smallest, was making small chirping sounds of contentment. "It started when I was telling them about earth animals. They asked to see pictures, and then they wanted to hear stories about them." "Stories?" Commander Vethra entered the room, her clawed feet clicking against the metal floor. "What kind of stories could possibly be so compelling that my cubs reject their own sleeping den?" Sarah walked over to her small desk and picked up a tablet. "Well, I started with simple things. Information about different animals, how they live, what they eat. But the cubs kept asking questions. They wanted to know what the animals felt, what they dreamed about. So I started telling them stories that humans tell their children. Fairy tales mostly. And then I moved on to other stories." Mava, the middle cub, lifted her head from the pile. "Mother, Dr. Sarah tells stories about brave animals who save their families, and about humans who fight monsters to protect the weak, and about tiny creatures who outsmart bigger creatures through cleverness." Her young voice was filled with excitement. "The stories make pictures in my mind. I see them when I close my eyes." Rith, the oldest cub, added, "In the den, it is dark and quiet. My thoughts become scattered and strange. But when Dr. Sarah tells stories, my thoughts have a path to follow. I fall asleep thinking about adventures, and I wake up feeling rested." Commander Vethra stood very still. Her 4 eyes moved from her cubs to Sarah and back again. "Karathi do not have this tradition. We put our young in dens, we ensure they are safe and fed, and we expect them to sleep. It has always been this way. Different species develop different methods of care," Sarah said carefully. She was aware that she might be crossing cultural boundaries, but she also genuinely cared about the cubs. Humans discovered long ago that stories help young minds process the world. They learn about danger without experiencing it. They learn about courage without needing to test it. And they learn that they are not alone in the universe because stories connect us to everyone who came before. Kelp, the smallest cub, suddenly spoke up. His voice was barely more than a squeak. "Mother, Dr. Sarah has a warmth." Commander Vethra tilted her head. "A warmth? The temperature in her quarters is the same as everywhere else on the ship." "Not that kind of warmth," Kelp said, struggling to find the words. "When she talks, there is something in her voice that feels like safety, like being wrapped in soft things. The den does not have that warmth. The den is just walls and darkness." Sarah felt her heart squeeze painfully. She had not meant to become emotionally attached to these alien cubs, but here she was, fighting back tears at the words of a child who was not even her species. Lieutenant Brox, who had been standing silently in the doorway, finally spoke. "Commander, I must report something. The cubs are not the only ones affected by the humans' presence." Commander Vethra turned to him sharply. "Explain." "The engineering team has begun gathering in the recreation area during their rest cycles to listen to Dr. Chen tell stories. At first it was just 2 or 3 crew members, but last night there were 17. They said the stories helped them relax after difficult shifts. Several reported sleeping better than they have in years." Commander Vethra was silent for a long moment. In the Karathi military, rest was considered a simple biological function. You worked, you ate, you slept, you worked again. The idea that rest could be enhanced or improved through something as intangible as stories was completely foreign to her. "Dr. Chen," she finally said, "when humans are young, do all of them receive these stories before sleep?" Sarah nodded. "Most of them, yes. Parents tell bedtime stories or read from books or sometimes just make up adventures on the spot. It's one of the most universal human traditions. We call it bedtime storytelling, and it goes back thousands of years." "And you believe this is why humans are known throughout the galaxy for their creativity? For their ability to think of solutions that other species cannot imagine?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think it's part of it. When you grow up hearing stories about impossible things, your mind learns to imagine impossible things. And when you can imagine something, you're one step closer to making it real." Commander Vethra walked slowly to the bed where her cubs were piled together. Kelp had already fallen asleep, his small chest rising and falling steadily. Mava was fighting to keep her eyes open, clearly not wanting to miss any of the adult conversation. Rith was watching his mother with curious, intelligent eyes. "When I was a cub," Commander Vethra said quietly, "I was placed in the sleeping den and told to rest. If I could not sleep, I was told to try harder. If I was afraid of the dark, I was told that fear was weakness. I learned to suppress everything and simply exist in the darkness until morning came." She paused. "I never knew there was another way." Sarah moved to stand beside her. "It's not too late to learn. For any of you." Rith suddenly sat up. His ears perked forward. "Mother, would you like to hear a story? Dr. Sarah taught me one. It is about a human child named Jack who traded his family's cow for magic beans. It sounds foolish at first, but the story teaches that sometimes the strangest choices lead to the greatest treasures." Commander Vethra looked at her oldest cub with new eyes. She had raised him to be strong and disciplined, but she had never heard him speak with such enthusiasm about anything. "You learned a human story?" "I learned 7, Rith said proudly. "And I created 2 of my own. Dr. Sarah said they were very good for a first attempt. She said imagination is like a muscle, and it grows stronger when you use it." Something shifted in Commander Vethra's expression. The strict military officer faded, and for a moment, Sarah saw something else. A mother who wanted to understand her children. A person who was beginning to realize that her culture might be missing something important. "Very well," Commander Vethra said, sitting down on the edge of Sarah's bed. Her large frame made the bed creak, but the cubs immediately moved to make room for her. "Tell me this story of Jack and his beans." Rith's eyes lit up with joy. He began to speak, and his young voice filled the small room with words that had been passed down through generations of human families. Sarah watched as Commander Vethra listened, her 4 eyes focused entirely on her cub. At some point, Mava stopped fighting sleep and curled against her mother's side. Kelp remained peacefully asleep, occasionally twitching his paws as if dreaming of adventures. By the time Rith finished the story, Commander Vethra was looking at Sarah with an expression that crossed all species barriers. It was gratitude mixed with wonder, mixed with a touch of sadness for all the years she had missed. "We have been traveling the stars for centuries," Commander Vethra said. "We have discovered technologies that would seem like magic to primitive species. We have conquered physics and bent space itself to our will. But we never discovered this simple thing, this warmth that comes from words shared in the darkness." Sarah smiled. "Humans aren't the most advanced species in the galaxy. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the longest lived. But we learned early that the universe is cold and dark and frightening, and the only way to survive it is to create our own warmth. Stories were our first technology. Before fire, before tools, before anything else, we had our voices and our imagination." Commander Vethra stood up slowly, careful not to disturb her sleeping cubs. "I will speak with the Council of Elders when we reach the home world. If stories can help our young minds develop, if they can help our workers rest better, if they can create this warmth you speak of, then perhaps the Karathi need to learn from humanity." "I would be honored to help," Sarah said. "And I'm sure the cubs would love to teach their own stories to other Karathi children someday." The commander paused at the door. "Dr. Chen, my cubs may continue to sleep in your quarters if they wish, but I ask that you also teach me these stories. I would like to tell them myself, in our family den, as my cubs taught me tonight that a parent's voice has a different kind of warmth than a stranger's." After the commander and Lieutenant Brox left, Sarah returned to her bed. The 3 cubs had spread out in her absence, taking up far more space than their small bodies should have been able to occupy. She carefully moved Kelp aside and climbed under the blankets. In the darkness, Rith's voice came soft and sleepy. "Dr. Sarah? Thank you for teaching us about warmth." Sarah reached out and gently patted his head, feeling the soft fur beneath her fingers. "Thank you for scratching at my door. Sometimes the best adventures start when someone refuses to stay where they're supposed to be." The cub made a sound that might have been a laugh. Then silence fell over the small room, broken only by the gentle hum of the ship's engines and the soft breathing of 3 alien children who had discovered that the universe was a little less cold when you had stories to keep you warm. In the days that followed, things changed aboard the Wandering Hope. The story sessions in the recreation area grew larger. Crew members began creating their own tales, mixing Karathi history with human narrative structures. The ship's psychologist reported a significant decrease in stress-related complaints. The engineering team became more creative in their problem-solving, approaching challenges with a playfulness that had never existed before. And every night, without fail, 3 small cubs would scratch at the human's door until she let them in, ready to hear about worlds they had never seen and heroes they could someday become. The galaxy would later record this as the moment when Karathi culture began its great transformation. Historians would call it the storytelling revolution. But Sarah Chen would always remember it simply as the night when 3 lost children taught their mother how to love them in a new way, and how that simple act of scratching at a door changed everything.